shade of your lotus feet. May your fame be spread all over the universe. We take shelter of your lotus feet, Srila Prabhupada.
Yes.
Prabhupada ki, ISKCON Sanstapika Acharya Shri Prabhupada ki, Janam Koti Vaishnava ki, Shri Shri Gauranatai ki, Shri Shri Jagannath Subhadra Baladev ki, Grantaraja Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Gaura Premanand. All glories to the Ascendant. All glories to the Ascendant. All glories to the Ascendant. All glories to Shri Guru, Shri Gauranga.
I just realized that the Asatana is somehow, and we have the camera set in a certain position for the recording. So, cleaning probably.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So this morning we continue with our theme of Saturday, Scientific Saturdays, studying today from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, which is entitled The Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. We're going to chant text 10 and read the purport, and then I'm going to read through texts 11 and 12 as well. Shri Bhagavan
Shri Bhagavan
Uvacha
Uvacha
Yat
Yat
Tat
Tat
Trigunam
Trigunam
Avyaktam
Avyaktam
Nityam
Nityam
Sad
Sad
Asad
Asad
Atmakam
Atmakam
Pradhanam
Pradhanam
Prakritim
Prakritim
Prahur
Prabhu
Avishesham
Avishesham
Avisheshavat
Avisheshavat
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam
Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam
Nityam Sad Asad Atmakam
Nityam Sat Asad Atmakam
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur
Pradhanam Prakritim Prabhu
Avishesham Visheshavat
Avishesham Visheshavat
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam
Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam
Nityam Sad Asad Atmakam
Nityam Sat Asad Atmakam
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur
Pradhanam Prakritim Prabhu
Avishesham Visheshavat
Avishesham Visheshavat
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam
Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam
Nityam Sad Asad Atmakam
Nityam Sat Asad Atmakam
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur
Pradhanam Prakritim Prabhu
Avishesham Visheshavat
Avishesham Visheshavat Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam Nityam Sat Asadatmakam
Nityam Sad Asad Atmakam
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur
Avishesham Visheshavat
Avishesham Visheshavat
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha
Yatta Trigunam Avakat
Yatta
Trigunam Avyaktam
Nityam Sak Asat Atvakam
Nityam Sad Asad Atmakam
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur
Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur Avishesham Visheshavat. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Yatta Trigunam Avyaktam Nityam Sada Sadatmakam Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur Avishesham Visheshavat. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Yattat Trigunam Avyaktam Nityam Sada Sadatmakam Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur Avishesham Visheshavat. Shri Bhagavan Vacha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said.
Yat. Now, further.
Now further.
Tat. That. Trigunam. Combination of the three modes. Avyaktam. Unmanifested. Nityam. Eternal. Sad Asad Atmakam. Consisting of cause and effect. Pradhanam. The Pradhana. Prakritim. Prakriti. Prahu. They call. Avishesham. Undifferentiated. Visheshavat. Possessing differentiation. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifest state and is called pradhana. It is called prakriti when it is in the manifested stage of existence. Please repeat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifest state and is called pradhana. It is called prakriti when in the manifested stage of existence. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. The Lord points out material nature in its subtle stage, which is called pradhana, and He analyzes this pradhana. The explanation of pradhana and prakriti is that pradhana is the subtle, undifferentiated sum total of all material elements. Although they are undifferentiated, one can understand that the total material elements are contained therein. When the total material elements are manifested by the interaction of the three modes of material nature, the manifestation is called prakriti. Impersonalists say that Brahman is without variegatedness. Impersonalists say that Brahman is without variegatedness and without differentiation. One might say that Pradhana is the Brahman stage, but actually the Brahman stage is not Pradhana. Pradhana is distinct from Brahman because in Brahman there is no existence of the material modes of nature. One may argue that the Mahatattva is also different from Pradhana because in the Mahatattva there are manifestations. The actual explanation of Pradhana, however, is given here. When the cause and effect are not clearly manifested, avyakta, the reaction of the total elements does not take place, And that stage of material nature is called pradhana. Pradhana is not the time element, because in the time element there are actions and reactions, creation and annihilation. Nor is it the jiva, or marginal potency of living entities, or designated conditioned living entities, because the designations of the living entities are not eternal. One adjective used in this connection is nitya, which indicates eternality. Therefore, the condition of material nature, immediately previous to its manifestation, is called pradhana. I'll read the next two verses just because it flows into what we are discussing today. Panchabir Brahma, Chaturbir Dashabhistata, Etach Chatur Vimungshatikam, Gunam Pradhanikam Vidu. The aggregate elements, namely the 5 gross elements, the 5 subtle elements, the 4 internal senses, the 5 senses for gathering knowledge, and the 5 outward organs of action, are known as the pradhana. Purport. According to Bhagavad Gita, the sum total of the 24 elements described herein is called the Yonir Mahad Brahma. The sum total of the living entities is impregnated into this Yonir Mahad Brahma. And they are born in different forms, beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant ant. In the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures, the sum total of the 24 elements, pradhana, is also described as Yonir Mahad Brahma. It is the source of the birth and subsistence of all living entities. Text 12. Mahabhutani panchaiva bhur apo agnir marun nava tanmatrani cha tavanti gandadhini matani me. There are 5 gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air and ether. There are also 5 subtle elements, smell, taste, colour, touch and sound. Text 10 again. Sri Bhagavan Vacha Yat Tat Trigunam Avyaktam Nityam Sadasat Atmakam Pradhanam Prakritim Prahur Avishesham Visheshavat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the unmanifested eternal combination of the 3 modes is the cause of the manifest state and is called pradhana. It is called prakriti when in the manifested stage of existence. Oma Gyanat Marandasya Gyananjana Salakai Chakshuran Milatam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Hare Krishna. This is probably one of the most complicated chapters in the Bhagavatam to really get our heads around. This is Kapila speaking to his mother. So when it says the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we're talking about the incarnation, Kapila Dev. It's entitled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, and it is describing how this whole material world works. Now, to put it in context of what we've been discussing, we spent quite a bit of time talking about consciousness, because it's a good place always to start with anyone new to philosophy, science, and the theology of Krishna consciousness. We want to explain and get into people's heads that this fact that they exist and that they know they exist and that they're aware of the world is very special. It's the faculty of consciousness, the faculty of awareness of my own existence. And that's amazing. And that there is no way of explaining that particular ability, that experience that we're having in terms of material functions and properties. And it's very important for us then to understand, well, what is the relationship of consciousness with the material world? Because the challenge that we hear all the time is, well, if you are spirit soul and you're transcendental, you're spirit, then how can you interact with a physical world? Surely that's breaking all the physical laws. No. And that the difficulty is the analysis of the physical world done by the materialist assumes that we start with the world and we try and break it down into its constituent parts, and we try and understand what it is made of, what it's composed of, and therefore get an understanding of how it can work, and of course how to manipulate it. Now, the Bhagavatam is also breaking down the workings of the material world, but it does it in a different way. It does it in a way that already appreciates that consciousness exists, that consciousness is primary, that consciousness is part of a bigger picture than the material world, the bigger picture of Brahman. And that what we are calling the material world, material energy, is not just this one universe, but there is unlimited numbers of universes, and they're all existing within this sea of material energy. And that's where we're coming to in this chapter. We're going to hear about the material energy in its rawest form. And this is actually quite a brilliant analysis. Not quite a brilliant, it's a brilliant, it's phenomenally brilliant analysis. Sometimes when devotees hear about the different senses, earth, water, fire, air, isn't that a bit medieval, you know? It seems a bit old-fashioned, and it's very hard to talk to modern trained people about the fundamental principles or elements. But we'll see that actually these are the elementary factors of the material world around us. And that what we have been told are the elements aren't really elementary. But we start first with how the Bhagavatam introduces this aspect. When it's talking about the material world, it first establishes that the material world exists for the jivas. You know, the jivas, the souls, exist eternally with Krishna. And for those who don't want to be with Krishna, there is a special alternative. So the material energy is designed to interact with consciousness, with the consciousness of the jivas. It's designed to be manifest to facilitate the desires of the jivas. Nityo nityanam chaitanas chaitananam eko bahunam yovadadati kaman. That out of all the eternal living beings, there is one supreme eternal. Out of all the conscious entities who are eternal, there is one supreme eternal conscious being. And that one, that Eka, is maintaining all the others and fulfilling their desires. So that's what Krishna is about. He just loves the jivas and he wants to fulfill their desires. So that is most wonderfully done in spiritual existence, but because spiritual existence is the choice and free will of the jiva, there has to be potential for the alternative. That is the material world. So the material world exists for our interaction. It exists for us to create experience. And it's pointed out in this chapter and in the chapter before that, although Krishna is going to manifest all these things and the material world works in a particular way, The material world isn't responsible for our suffering. We are. Because we want to be in it, and we've decided to be in it in a particular way, in a particular enjoying spirit. The first class I heard Srila Prabhupada give live at Bhaktivedanta Manor was actually on this topic of Purusha and Prakriti. It's from the 6th chapter. And Prabhupada was explaining, that Krishna is the Purusha, the ultimate Purusha. But we like to think of ourselves as little Purushas, little enjoyers. And therefore we try to exploit Prakriti, the material energy, for our own enjoyment. And that's never going to make us happy. It just gets us further and further entangled. So that is the first point, that the material energy is provided by Krishna to facilitate us. Now this particular verse gives the summary of how it all kind of not only gets going, but how it works in its throughout its different cycles. It's saying that there is this raw, undifferentiated state of matter called pradhana. And pradhana is both a substance and also the gunas. The gunas operate as kind of information, as determining information for the thing, the shapes, the forms, the qualities that matter is going to take. So there's energy, which is the substance stuff. It would be wrong to think of it in terms of matter as we experience it, hard objects. It's energy. And there is information, provided by the gunas. But in the initial state, the gunas, which we often talk about in competition with one another, fighting for dominance, but in the pradhana state, the gunas are balanced. They're not acting on anything. And therefore, in one sense, nothing is manifest. But the potential for everything exists within that state. This is our Sat Karyavad philosophy, that the effect actually has its original existence in the cause. That unless the potential for that effect exists in the cause, how can that effect ever come about? So the material energy has the potential for manifesting all the universes and everything within them. But in this pradhana state, it's just energy and gunas at rest, just waiting. Now we can't really apply a type of sequence to this because it's beyond our comprehension. And the Bhagavatam, in the way it presents it, it might sometimes see that the sequence comes like this, or that this happens before this, and so on. And that just helps us understand a certain hierarchy of what is happening. But it may not be appropriate to try and really fix it in a particular sequence for ourselves. But we have this raw state. Now, of course, within pradhana, there is something more. The Supreme Lord himself, in his form of? In pradhana? Who's there in pradhana, in the material energy? Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu, this is the material energy. It's the cloud in the spiritual world, if you like, cloud in the spiritual sky rather. And within that is Mahavishnu. And within Mahavishnu reside all the jivas who are destined for the material world. or who are already resting there from a previous dissolution of the universes. So all the jivas are contained within the body of Mahavishnu, resting there in slumber. It's a kind of unconscious state for us. And then Mahavishnu activates Kala. Kala is time. But rather than think of it as the passing of time and time as a medium, Kala, and we've been analysing this word in some cosmology discussions we've been having with Hridayananda Maharaj. Kala actually means to drive forward. It's that which moves things. And what Kala does is allow the things within in matter to change. So when Kala starts operating, the gunas can become activated. But what the gunas need in order to become activated is the jiva's impregnation. So all of this seems to happen as one process, that the jivas are impregnated from Mahavishnu into the material energy. Now, Mahadyonir is mentioned here, this kind of the material energy as the womb to accept the jivas. And again, this is not something we can really appreciate in reality. We're just given some ways of meditating on what's going on here. But what we understand, the principle is that the jivas, along with all their old karma from previous times in the universe, along with all their desires, and basically this whole destiny of what they're about to, what they need to continue to embark on within the material world, is there. And that's what the gunas work on. The gunas are analysing each of our kind of karmic desires and destiny and saying, all right, you're going to need these set of bodies, you're going to need to kind of exist in this, you're destined for the heavenly planet, that's where we'll stick you initially, we'll put you elsewhere. I'm down somewhere in a miserable state, whatever. So the gunas are activated thanks to Kala, but what they activate on is an analysis of the activities and desires of the jivas. That's their role. They analyze that, and then they help to manifest whatever is going to be needed to facilitate the jivas in the material world. So once the jivas are impregnated, Kala is operational, the gunas are doing their work. We don't tend to call the material energy pradhan anymore. Things are happening in it. But this is still part of the primary creation. So nothing is physically manifest yet. The universes haven't appeared yet, and all the objects and things within the universe, including our bodies and everything else, have not manifest yet. But we now call this is the Mahatattva. It's causal, because it is now charged with the desires of the jivas. And that's what's going to ultimately be the causal, the thing that's going to be fulfilled within the material world. So this is a state of prakriti in which things are happening, but it is not yet fully manifest. Nothing is physically manifest. But the elements start to appear within this state of prakriti. And they are the 24 elements mentioned here: the 5 gross elements, the 5 subtle elements, the 4 internal senses, the 5 senses for gathering knowledge, and the 5 outward organs of action are known as pradhana. So they're all within this unmanifested state. But they don't exist. There is no awareness of them as objects. They are just elementary, I suppose you could say they're in the concept stage. They are packets of information, packets of prakriti that are going to be the components of what is going to create experience for the jivas in the material world. But no jivas are experiencing any of the properties of these whilst it's still just in this avyakta prakriti stage. So it's only then when the universal andas are generated that the shells of the universe are provided by the elements, particularly the 5 gross elements, plus false ego, plus a thing called mahat, and then beyond that the false ego state of prakriti. So looking at these material elements, let's understand them from the point of view of consciousness. The standard scientific process is to try and break down matter and tell you what it's... They give the impression that they're able to tell you what it's made of. But science never comes to a point of knowing or being able to describe what anything is made of. Let me explain. If we take this nice little arrangement for the Bhagavatam here, then we break it down and say, well, what is it? It seems to be made of wood. Great. So what's wood made of? Well, it's, of course, a biological thing, and most of it is a kind of cellulose structure. So what's cellulose made? Well, it's made from different molecules. Okay, so stuff is made out of molecules. This is made out of molecules. I'm made out of molecules, combinations of atoms. And what are molecules? So what are atoms? Well, these are often described in terms as the elements. You learn your periodic table, right? Hydrogen, helium, was it lithium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, whatever it is. And they're all nicely arranged. There is a story that the Russian scientist Mendeleev had some interaction with his colleagues at the university who were looking at the structure of Sanskrit and the arrangement of the letters in terms of the different types. You know, it's arranged as a matrix. And the story is that he got the idea of arranging the chemical atoms and elements in that way, you know, lines and columns. And that's now very famous. And these atoms can be considered elementary, but only in terms of chemistry. They have elementary functions and properties that you can class when you're thinking about chemistry. So we think about this particular element, hydrogen. It has the properties that enable it to link with oxygen, and that gives us H2O. Another thing, sodium can lose an electron and become a positive ion and link with one of the ions that make up water, OH. And so you have sodium hydroxide. And then you can mix that with something else, with an acid, and you'll get sodium will stick to a chlorine atom, a chlorine ion, and that gives us sodium chloride, which is common salt. So in looking at their properties and their functions within chemistry, these are elementary. But it doesn't mean that we now know what an atom is. We only know what its properties appear to be and how it interacts with others. Properties and functions, properties and functions. And that's what's also mentioned here in this chapter, that you can only analyze matter in terms of functions, vritti, and lakshana, properties, characteristics. So then we look at each atom, we break it down and say, well, actually, each of these atoms is composed of smaller stuff. You know, and the simple version, protons, neutrons forming the nucleus, and electrons spinning around it. And, well, are these elementary? Well, only when you're doing very simple kind of analysis. But then we kind of discover that protons and neutrons are composed of quarks, which are always interacting with each other, and there's a lot of other subatomic activity going on. And we're starting to define all these subatomic elements or entities in terms of their properties and their functions. We only, like for instance, what is an electron? An electron, it's not a thing. It's not a particle. It's not a wave. It's a packet of energy. But it's a packet of energy that acts in a particular way. So that's why we call it an electron, different from something else. It has a charge, but what's charge? We don't know. Charge just means that this seems to be attracted, charges repel. So if something repels, we say it's got charge. But what's charge? No one can tell you. It just is something that we're saying is responsible for repelling. What's mass? That's something that seems to be responsible for things becoming attracted to one another. But what actually is mass, we don't know. So the whole analysis now of physics is that we break down the material world around us into energy and information. The same thing that Bhagavatam has always been saying, that the material energy is just energy and information, acting to exhibit properties and interactive functions. That's all that's going on. All this stuff. Now, the scientific method of breaking things down, though, has a big problem. You break what you think the world is made of, and you can even do that not just for the object, but for a body. And you don't find consciousness. When you analyze what this body is, what it's made of, what all the different functions going on, we cannot find consciousness anywhere in there. It just doesn't, because you get down to entities which we have said have these properties and these activities, and none of those properties or activities seems to be in any way related to the function of consciousness. That's the problem for physics. That what it's got to play with eventually, when you get down to these, and you can get beyond the standard model of physics particles, you get down into the world of quantum fields, Still no scope for consciousness down there. Nothing that matters. Nothing that means anything to us. And the other problem is we don't actually understand how those fundamental things weigh at that level of quantum activity and subatomic particles, how that actually produces a world that gives us the type of experience that we have. So we don't understand consciousness, we don't understand why the world gives us the experience of consciousness that we have in consciousness. Whereas what because the Bhagavatam is concerned primarily with consciousness of the living entities in relationship to Krishna. It is all about Krishna consciousness. So it analyzes the material world and in a way that explains why we have experience of it. That's its point. Why do we have experience of it? It's because that what is ultimately arranged by whatever this substance of the material world is, it exhibits these particular elementary functions. You know, we're going to have 5 gross elements, the Mahabhutas. We're going to have 5 subtle sense objects, the Tanmatras. We're going to have senses which can connect with them. 5 senses that help to gather information for knowledge acquiring, and 5 senses which enable us to interact and appear to be the doers within this world. 5 working senses. And in order to connect all those senses back to us, we have the 4 internal senses: mana, mind; buddhi, intelligence; ahankara, false ego; and chittam, contaminated consciousness. So, just want to focus a little bit on the Tanmatras and the Mahabhutas, because we read the evolution or flow of the production of these. The first entity that seems to emerge, the first Tanmatra, of course, is sound. And from a transformation of sound, there is ether. And from the activities of sound and in ether, we get the next Tanmatra, which is after Shabda. What's the next one? Sparsha, touch. Now, and then from that we get, well, from Sparsha, what does Sparsha manifest within? See, the subtle element, the subtle sense object, needs a substrate to hold it and to manifest it. So when sound is manifest within ether, the senses can connect with it. All right? And it becomes part of the material world. It becomes manifest to us, to our senses. When the subtle sense object sparsha becomes, and I think Prabhupada in the previous Acharyas used this word, inhered. It's an English word which doesn't seem to exist in the dictionary. Google always kind of comes up and says, no, don't recognize this, don't know what you're trying to say. But it's from this word inherent. If something is inherent in something, it's just automatically included. It's almost one with that thing. So sound becomes almost one with the substrate that's holding it, and then that manifests its properties become manifest within that Mahabhuta. When Sparsha is inhered in the substrate of Vayu, then you will experience, your senses will pick up the sensations of touch and so on. And then the next one is? Huh? Yes, the next one, the subtle sense object is sight, form, rupa, which also translated as form and color. So when rupa then is inhered in fire, Agni, then it manifests. And we know fire has shape and color and movement and all the things that we can observe with our eyes. And then the next one, taste. Rasa is used in that. So the subtle sense object is rasa, and that inheres on? Yeah. And therefore we are able to actually experience the sensations of taste. And then the last one is Gandha, and that inheres on earth elements. So we've got a very interesting progression from the subtlest form of sense perception, hearing, all the way through to the manifestation of smell inhered in the earth elements. So the mind then is said to pass over. It goes out through the holes of our the senses. So it's as described in Paranjan's story. The mind is going forth. So if my sense of touch, the mind's going out and connecting with this and pulling back the fact that there is hardness here. There is warmth. So it's bringing back subtle tanmatras back into the mind. And it is, so the qualities that are manifest in the Mahabhutas are, the tanmatras are responsible for that. But the type of qualities of the tanmatras are defined by the modes. The modes of nature determine the type, the qualities of a particular tanmatra. So let's use Gandha as that. There are different smells. Some of them very attractive, flowers, incense. And then there's other smells that just aren't as nice. And putrid, horrible, stinking smells, So both are Gandha, but Gandha in the mode of, with a lot of more sattva qualities, will smell attractive and pleasant. Gandha, tanmatra, with a lot more rajasic, may try to agitate the mind in various ways. And then Gandha, which is just imbued with tamagun, is going to just feel nasty and will feel dirty just even smelling it. So the tanmatras give the particular properties of our sense experience, but the gunas that are defining them will define the qualities and how we will experience what types of sound we hear, what types of things we see, what things we touch, Hare Krishna, what types of things we taste, and what types of things we smell. So this is all of these aspects that are mentioned in this chapter are actually needed to explain the full experience we have of this world. And really that's all there is. Do we need to know all this chemistry and physics? You can get away without it, you know. Human society did. You know, get away with a lot of it. You can live very happily modelling it purely with these understandings of the gunas, the tanmatras, the mahabhutas. You can understand how all that kind of interacts very nicely. The problem is humans try and break down the material world without any relationship to Krishna or to consciousness. There are various Sankhya philosophers in the past who tried to do that. And that's why Sankhya sometimes has a bad name. Even in Vedanta, Vyasa is complaining about it. But he's complaining about the type of Sankhya that tries to say that the material world is able to produce everything just from its material.